This conference will now be recorded.
All right, here we go. Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to 2022 and our first networking call for the year. Thanks everyone for joining. We've got a couple of things on agenda for today. We're going to have Gary cover the TAP oscillator work that's part of the TAP group. And then after that, we'll have Cliff go over the educational webinar program within OCP. Sound good? So Gary, I'm going to make you a presenter if you're ready.
Okay, yep.
Thanks.
So can you see my screen now?
Yes, we see it.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you, Omar, for letting me come and sort of socialize the work we're doing in OCP TAP oscillator stream here in the networking group. My name is Gary Joost, and I'm leading the oscillator work stream for OCP TAP. My day job, I work in marketing at SciTime. So the oscillator work stream is tasked with the classification of oscillators at different nodes in the network. And by oscillators, I've listed here the types of oscillators that we're going to classify. So for open grandmasters, mainly it's atomic clocks, but for point of presence applications, it could be an OCXO. For the spine and leaf switches, today it's transparent clocks with the simple XO. But in the future, it could be synchronous Ethernet, or it could be boundary clocks that require more sophisticated timing for precision oscillators like a TCXO, or if you need holdover, then an OCXO. And then finally, the NICs, we have ordinary clocks, which today are XOs, but as 5G moves to the edge, we could see requirements for TCXOs there as well. Somebody's typing, maybe you can just mute yourself. So with the oscillator workstream, the issue that created the motivation to create the oscillator workstream is that when you're looking at an oscillator datasheet, it's very difficult for the end users to extract the 1588 performance they can expect and rely on. And one of the more critical components is holdover. So when you lose connection to an upstream frequency reference and you're relying on the local oscillator to keep an accurate frequency for time synchronization, then every manufacturer of an oscillator performs a slightly different way of not only characterizing holdover, but reporting it on the data sheet. And that requires a constant negotiation between the end system customer and the oscillator vendor for each oscillator vendor they're interested in. So if they're second sourcing oscillators, then there's multiple conversations going on to try to relate and compare devices to facilitate the proper selection for a given level of performance. And that makes it difficult to select oscillators. So what we're trying to do in this work stream is simplify the oscillator selection that would result in a predictable 1588 performance for synchronization in the network. And one of the key characteristics is enabling apples to apples comparison of oscillator holdover, which isn't available today, even in more mature networks like in the telecom network. So our proposed solution is to classify oscillators according to the various places in the network they'll be used and for the given performance levels that they're intended for. And part of that is not only standardizing the parameters of an oscillator, it's also standardizing the test procedures or the test methods for each one of those procedures, in particular holdover. There's not a holdover specification in the industry today for any standard. So this is something that is very necessary and will be very useful to the end customer to be able to compare different devices, holdover performance, apples to apples. So just to give you an idea of what we're working on, for the grandmaster used without frequency support in the network, for example, without synchronous Ethernet in a data center, we've created in the oscillator workstream this table specifying the different levels of the different requirements for this grandmaster. And these are captured within a document we call the requirements document for OCP tap oscillator classes. And this is the first class G1 that we've captured. And so we're going to put this forward through the incubation committee in this month. And then we'll keep adding new classes on for different nodes in the network and for different levels of performance. You can see here we have 24-hour holdover performance at 1.4 microseconds and 1 hour of holdover for 250 nanoseconds. In the future revision, we'll work on the transparent clock, and here's what we have listed here, and this would be for the spine leaf switches. So the ambient temperature range, the frequency stability, the level of jitter that's required, and the G sensitivity. And this will make its way into a future revision of that document. But what's interesting is that for an OCP license for a specification, it requires a common mechanical footprint. And as you're probably aware, oscillator footprints, there's no industry standard for an oscillator footprint. It's up to the manufacturer if they want to copy a competitor's footprint, but there's really no mechanical constraint on oscillators when they're being developed to say they have to fit a certain form like there is for the work that you do with the switches. And so when it comes time to creating a compliance program, the oscillator workstream creates a requirements document under the OCP license, but we require coordination and endorsement from other groups, which is why we're here today in order to enforce compliance. So the call to action that I'm proposing here, reaching out to other groups such as the networking group and hoping that you'll endorse the efforts that we have for synchronizing timing across the data center. And part of that is to refer to the oscillator requirements document in the network specifications that you create. And that will ensure that we have some teeth behind these documents to say that it's not just a recommendation, but it actually is a requirement for a component that has a mechanical specification according to the OCP license. And we welcome your feedback on this. And of course, if you're interested in synchronization, we do recommend that you participate in OCP TAP. And if you're interested in the oscillator workstream, I've listed a wiki page where you can access all the recordings of the meetings we've had to date and subscribe to the OCP TAP mailing list. So that's about it. Do we have any questions or comments or feedback? I'd love to hear.
Hi, Gary. Elad here. Hi, everyone. I work with Gary on the TAP project, and just to highlight that this requirement document, it will be presented to the OCP incubation committee next week, and we expect it to be rolling out sometime in the January timeframe. So we're coming over to you at the right time, I think, to get your feedback, to get your endorsements, hopefully, and to see that these two projects are in good coordination. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Are there any questions from the working project on our work for timing oscillators?
Can you talk a little bit? I don't see if anyone else has questions. Can you talk a little bit about the what you feel like the vendor or provider community will look like from the oscillator workstream?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that we've had companies that have joined the oscillator workstream and have attended meetings. They're all the major oscillator vendors, both covering exos, TCXos, OCXos, and atomic clocks. We've got Aurelia, Microchip, Epson, Vectron, SciTime, Renesas. So we've seen strong support from that community. Is that what you were asking about, or was it something else?
You know, that's good. I think, but then I think that was the start. Then my follow-on question, I think, would be, what are your thoughts on then having all those vendors coming together, and then what can, you know, from an openness perspective and an OCP perspective, how do you hope those vendors could all come together and work? Would we change the way they work, or you know, I guess to a certain extent, like we can have a standard defined with requirements, but then how does that align with sort of general OCP tenets of, you know, openness and scale and that sort of thing?
Well, let me speak. Maybe Eli can jump in after I speak, but from my point of view, what I'm envisioning, and we've talked to some extent about this in the oscillator workstream, is that, you know, do we want to go out and make this a requirement that oscillators have to solicit compliance reports from independent third-party laboratories such as UNH-IOL, the Interoperability Laboratory, or I think what we're leaning towards is having, you know, these types of specifications in the requirements document are things that generally get measured, or if they're not, they should be measured by the oscillator vendors. So they can self-certify with the document that they create that they have this level of performance or better than this level if they want to show they've gone above and beyond the requirements. And also if there's any test methodologies that they adhere to the OCP TAP oscillator workstream test methods, and they can show the data that's resulted from that to show self-compliance. And then that would be up to the end customer to contact each of the vendors independently and ask for their compliance document for each of these classes, or at least the ones that they're interested in. And that way they're able to make an apples to apples comparison from the oscillator vendors.
Right, right. Is there anything like some sort of, in terms of those tests, is there anything that can be put into, say, open source or like a common test suite or anything like that?
Yeah, I think the most contentious one is the holdover methodology. And so there we're really trying to spell out a path that vendors have to take. And if they go through that path in the test procedure, then they end up with a number that can be compared apples to apples. And that, of course, would be, well, it'd be open source in the sense that there's no patents on that methodology. And there'll be a white paper that we use to explain the methodology eventually. And there'll be a study that we release where we're showing that the methodology is actually valid. We validate the methodology based on actual holdover measurements. So what the methodology is actually going to end up very accurate. So all these things will be put into the open source community. I say open source, but it's just information released to the public. I'm envisioning potentially in the future we could have some kind of a GUI software that people can upload their test data, select a few parameters, and then they will output a holdover measurement result, because it's mostly post-processing. It's how you do the post-processing of the frequency versus time and frequency versus temperature data. Then you can enter a thermal profile for what's appropriate to your application. You can enter some other characteristics, and it'll post-process the input data and end up with a holdover value. You can even enter the level of statistics that you want. So if you want 99.9999% accuracy or uptime, or if you want something lower or higher, you can enter that as a parameter as well, and end up with a different holdover number. So it's very specific to the end customer's environment. So that's longer term, but you know, I can envision that software to be released in a similar way that PCI SIG does for their jitter filtering for the reference clock for their standard. They have their own MATLAB-based executable that you can run. And I suppose other standards do as well.
Okay. I guess, you know, from a buyer perspective, right, you know, OCP TAP is putting together, here are certain requirements that we think are important, right? And then at one extreme is something, not extreme, but one option is to say something like the UNH lab does some sort of certification testing, and then certain vendors' equipment then show, look, that they've satisfied those requirements. And OCP TAP would define, these are the tests, and then we pay UNH to do those tests, right? Or we define those with them, and then people would then have to then say, hey, how do they conform? But then the question would be, as a user or a buyer, is that the only way to ensure that all these different products are meeting this, or is there some sort of like open source library I can see, I've run a test suite and they all show conformance, or I'm just trying to see how we get from this requirements page to people wanting to buy different oscillators from different folks, and how do they wind up showing that, right? And if OCP TAP is saying these are what we think our requirements are, then how do we get folks, the vendors, to say that we are in compliance, or we've made our own effort to comply to those? I guess that's the reason for my questions, Gary. So.
No, it makes sense. I mean, that's one of the fundamental questions to ask when you're creating these requirements, is how do you enforce them, or how do you get the oscillator vendors to actually provide the data? Well, if it's really up to the end customer, the Facebooks, the Googles, whoever wants to consume this particular standard, if there's motivation on the end customer front that to ask vendors for the G1 or the T1, in this case, requirements, if they're looking for a T1 oscillator class, then it's really up to the end customer, the operators or the people building the equipment, to request this from the vendors. And if they never do, then the vendors aren't motivated to do anything. And that's the way the standards really should be, even open source. There has to be a pull from the end customer. And if there is a pull, then you better believe that the oscillator vendors are going to want to satisfy that, because at the end of the day, they want to sell their products, right? So the measurements that we're asking people to make are either, most of them are already on a data sheet, or if they're not, then we're providing a methodology that they can go off and do the characterization. And it's not rocket science. It's just making sure everybody goes through the same path to provide transparent results that are comparable apples to apples. And in my mind, I'm thinking self-certification should be sufficient if they're willing to create a document saying that this is the document for the T1 transparent clock class, and here's the performance that they're getting for this particular product. If they want a better performance, we have another product, and so on and so forth. And in that way, you end up with a document that has in that document that oscillator vendor provides as contract, just like a data sheet is a contract for the level of performance.
Yeah. And I guess I was just wondering if there's anything more than data sheet comparison or data sheet conformance, right? Like you said, UNH IOL is at one end. Data sheet comparisons, which is already valuable to say, like, these are the things we think you should be looking at on the data sheets, is also. But like, I guess you said, like, what should the Facebooks or what should operators be asking for, right? Can OCP define, you as operators should be pulling this, you should be asking the vendors this. So that's, I guess, just a suggestion in terms of, it's somewhere between data sheet conformance and UNL testing. Is there something in between? Those are my only comments. So,
what are you envisioning the end outcome to be that you don't see here?
The thing I suggested was something, like a test suite that folks could run, or when people self-certify, right? Let's say any number of vendors you listed, right? What I wanted to get a sense of was, are they all certifying in sort of a consistent way? Like, oh, well, we thought we implemented, this stability, and we looked at the edge, the leading edge versus the trailing edge, or we did this. This is how we measured it, and then you wind up with different different tests that really aren't apples to apples, right? If you want apples to apples tests, then either you go through UNH or you go through some common library that, oh, hey, we all show we're passing these tests. So that's what I was trying to.
Okay, I understand your point of view. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. Again, it's up to you all to see if that's how much. Because if you go to UNH, then you've got one set of tests that UNH is running, right?
Yeah.
But then it goes through UNH. But if you wanted to go the self-certify route, if you did the self-certifying route with a common set of code or a common test bench, then it reduces some of that without having to go reduces the chance for ambiguity without going all the way to UNH.
Yeah, and I think it's the second path that we've been leaning on, in the sense that most of these requirements, like frequency stability, is a pretty standard thing in the industry, and everybody's probably fairly responsible for measuring it correctly. But other areas like holdover, there's just a wide variety of methodologies and ways of reporting, and particularly when it comes to statistics, because wander is a statistical noise process, and how do different vendors account for that? Is it 1 sigma? Is it 3 sigma? Is it 6 sigma? That never shows up in a data sheet nor application notes or white papers. So for those areas where there's some variability, then we like to define the methodology. But for the others where it's fairly consistently done throughout the industry, then there doesn't seem to be a need for that.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, but if there's things like holdover 24 hours, holdover when, where there's like a lot of interpretation, that'd be great. Okay, cool.
Does G sensitivity mean acceleration sensitivity?
It does, yes.
Okay.
So for example, if you're switching something out and it causes the chassis to jolt because of mechanical shock when you're changing something in it, or if there's fans going on or something that's causing the shock, when the fans start. And this is a fairly loose G sensitivity spec, but yeah, that's it. That's essentially what it is.
Great. Any other questions?
So do you guys think this is a good thing, or I'm just curious, have you ever contemplated synchronization, time synchronization within the networking group, and try to understand how you would ensure that?
I think we've just speaking, I don't mean to speak for the whole group, right? But and we have been looking at it. We have had different presentations from the time appliance group over the last year and have been in touch. I think, maybe your question is, what do you think should the networking group endorse or sort of recommend certain things that the TAP group is doing? Is that what you're hoping for?
Well, I guess I'm coming in here asking for, requesting the networking documents to refer back to the oscillator requirements document to ensure that those requirements are met. But there may be something else that you've been thinking about over the last year about how you would achieve something equivalently, or I'm just trying to gauge, was there other solutions that you thought about to ensure synchronization? Yeah, that basically, and yeah, if there's any pushback to this idea, if there's a better way to do it, or you generally think referring to this document would work.
It seems like referring to it would be interesting. Whether we make it a requirement, like this is the way you do it for all networking devices, that's a much larger step. But giving it as a reference to say, hey, this is something that that our partner group is working on that can help. I think that could.
So it would be more of an informative specification rather than a normative?
I think so. Because you can say like, does every piece of networking equipment need this? No, right? But if you need precision timing and certain requirements, you could look at this. Now, is this the only way it's done? And we would require all OCP networking to go through, if you want sort of precision timing to go through this. My guess is that would be too strong, but I'm just sort of riffing here.
Yeah, I agree. Referring to it might be the best option, right? To begin with.
When you say refer to it, are you just saying as a reference? I'm not sure who's last speaking.
Yeah, reference. Sorry, reference. Sorry, I had another conflict. I missed most of the presentation. But is there anything in the Sonic community that we need to do, Omar? I don't know. I
No,
missed an operating system. Just point of view.
I was wondering if we could include it in maybe one of the templates, sort of like Gary, I think it's a good question, and I think we'll have to, I don't know if we're going to answer it here, but sort of like, hey, if I see what the proposal is there a way, this is proceeding in parallel through TAP, but is there a way we can sort of reinforce it within our own network specifications?
Yeah, I think the two paths you could go down would be like an informative specification, which means that it's optional. And then the other one would be normative, meaning that it's mandatory. Our preference, or my preference, I should say, would be the normative, just so that we can put a stake in the ground and say, if you want synchronization, it'll be supported using, this particular document, whether in this document will have different levels of performance, and the end user can decide what level of performance they want. But unless we do that, it'll sort of, I think it'll bifurcate the market and won't be clear what people should choose. But that's just my own thinking.
Yeah, I think that's
of course, we don't have to decide now. I wanted to put the issue out there and okay.
If it is going to be normative, it's going to be one of those things that we would have to pull a much larger set of community members, because the different companies that work on providing networking specifications would all need to weigh in to say like, oh, okay, this is how we want to do it.
Yeah.
But it's possible, right? So informative is sort of like, hey, this is a little bit lower bar there, easier to go through, but I think we should still get the information out. But normative is, or making it a requirement is going to be, involve talking to all the longtime vendors that we work with.
And I think the other question would be if you do make it informative, then if you ever want to have synchronization, would you create an effort on your own to specify the oscillators used in the networking equipment? Because I think that's what the OCP TAP was created to do, was to open source all this information and keep it within one group.
Yep. So I think it's available, and so people are aware of that. Hey, if you're going to do anything, keep it aligned or be aware of it. Mm-hmm. But whether we would say any organization, in order to get OCP specification certified, that it must go through this is something I think we would have to open up to a much broader discussion.
Sure. But I think if you want to show that your equipment is synchronization compliant in some sense, it'll have to enter a normative spec, whether it's referring to OCP TAP or done, inside of your own group. So that might be just one thing you think at the back of your mind. If you want to have equipment that is compliant for synchronization, some level of performance, either you'll have to do it within your group or refer it elsewhere.
Oh, and then I think that's where I was getting then to, right? Because do it within the group, whether that's done sort of the certifying is then either by the vendors or by some third party, right? And then so if there was, so that's what I was trying to get at. If there's something leverageable out of the TAP group to say, hey, this is the way they're certifying, and this is the tests and conformance, then it makes it easier to get other people to adopt that, right? Otherwise, it's sort of hard to enforce it, right? Even if you did, you said not that networking would go and think of its own oscillator requirements separate from TAP, right? But if an individual vendor decided to do its own oscillation testing, there's nothing sort of enforcing it, enforcing compliance either in networking or in TAP right now, right? It's sort of just self-certifying.
When you say a vendor wanted to test it, are you talking about an oscillator vendor or an end customer vendor?
And an end customer vendor.
Okay, got it. So just to validate the test results.
Right.
Got it. Okay, I think I understand your concern now.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary, for the.
Okay, thank you for your everyone's time.
Hopefully you got some feedback.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's what we talked about last week, with Shimon on the Bluefield 3 and Bluefield 4, and he asked about the 7.
Maybe we can then move to Cliff. I think you wanted to share some information about educational work that OCP is doing.
Yeah, I would actually, and also provide a little bit of introduction to the market intelligence function, since not everyone, I think, has had a chance to get introduced to me and understand what I joined the OCP to achieve.
Great.
So,
thanks. So I see your slides. They're all good to go.
Perfect. Thank you, and thanks everyone for your time. I should be about 10 minutes, no more, and we'll have a few minutes for questions. Please feel to stop me at any time, and so I wanted to jump in and just make sure everyone understood what I came to the OCP to achieve, and it was really around two things. One, helping the OCP build awareness about what the OCP is doing in the broader community outside of the more narrow OCP circles that is obviously very well aware of the OCP. And to achieve that, I proposed an awareness function within the market intelligence function to brief the analysts and use the analysts as a channel to get to the enterprise and the telecom and the broader marketplace. And also I propose that we start doing educational webinars, which could be modeled after some of the analyst-led webinars done by analyst firms. And in some ways, parallel what the MEF is doing around making the MEF more of a thought leader, where people outside of engineers will come to learn what is the innovations that are being worked on by engineers at the OCP. Also, looking forward down the road, we'd like to launch something called OCP University, where we might have training programs and certification programs on some of the products that the OCP are in the OCP marketplace, so they become easier for enterprise and telecom providers to consume. Also, the other element that I said the market intelligence function could help out with is at looking at the futures and shaping the future, where building on some of the really good work done in the OCP FTI and symposium, where we expose new ideas from a community of researchers and academics. And now taking that a step further, perhaps launching a formal incubation program for the OCP, looking at some of what we think are the more commercializable ideas and help getting them funded, potentially launching even new companies. And so with that background, if no one has any questions, I'm going to jump into the educational webinar program, which is designed to both establish the OCP, as a thought leader in the marketplace, as well as our different members. And the idea here is to help members showcase some of the good work they're doing at the OCP and get more out of their investment in the OCP by making it visible to a broader audience, helping our members extend their brand and the reach of their company, promote what we're doing in the community to a broader community. And for the marketing folks, of course, at some point we need to generate leads so our vendor members can sell and can sell OCP recognized equipment, which then broadens adoption, something that we're tasked with doing. And so that's one of the reasons why our members would invest in sponsorships for an educational webinar. The real goal here to make it successful is that we need to combine a top analyst with innovative content and accomplished speakers that people will come to listen to and believe they can learn from. The topics for the webinars are going to be developed collaboratively, and I have crafted some topics already to prime the pump, and I've already had some member companies reach out to me with ideas around webinars that they might like to organize. And I'm also presenting here today in case going forward, anyone in the network group has a topic idea that they would like to explore. Please reach out to me. I'm here to help craft the topics and bring together an analyst potentially with other sponsors so that we can get a webinar launched. And the good news is I already have 2 webinars lined up for 1Q22 and hoping to fill 6 more slots for the year. We can also target attendees on the webinars by vertical and interest. And it's a way of bringing the ideas from the broader cloud provider community to the rest of the market. Now, in terms of the program itself, in the webinars that I've done in my past lives, it's reasonable to expect that we can attract over 400 registrants to a webinar. Typically, we get one third attending live, and then 1/3 coming back on demand as we continue to promote the webinar for 90 days after it's held. And for those marketing folk who are investing in sponsorships, we do guarantee a certain number of leads in their area. The webinars are 60 minutes in length, and they are done live with about 10 to 15 minutes for audience Q&A. So just to put a few dollars to it, we have a maximum of 3 sponsors per webinar, and the fee for a multi-sponsor webinar per sponsor is $10,000. If we do get 2 sponsors, that would give us $20,000, and that's the minimum we would need to proceed. We also have the option for one company to take a single sponsorship and sponsor the webinar and working with the analyst. So this is a bit hard to read. I'm going to send it out after the call. But the first 2 webinars, the one on sustainability, working with IT Renew and Summer, is set now for the 8th of March, 2022. And we're going to look at explaining to the broader community what might be a practical business case for data center sustainability. I've also got another webinar that is funded and is going to proceed with Viavi around data center interconnect and 400 and 800G and looking at disaggregation in the space. And I'm just waiting on the lead analyst, Jimmy Yu from Deloro, to provide to me what the abstract will be now. Whatever the topic is here, they obviously will be topics that are important to the OCP, and it'll be my team that will be reviewing the content to make sure that it's appropriate. So I'm going to stop presenting here and open the floor for questions. Just looking here for the place where I stop sharing. And so I'm wondering, what is the feedback on the program? Does anyone from the network team think that they might be interested to explore a topic with me? It'd be great to hear about that.
So Cliff, I had a couple of questions more from, I'm sure there are topics that we would want to do webinars on behalf of the networking group. What I was trying to figure out, two questions. One was, how did the webinars relate to the OCP sort of membership levels and contribution
Yes. So
requirements?
sponsoring a webinar would count as one contribution.
I see. So similar to if you were to write a white paper or if you do something else, this is, creation of a webinar is another
Correct.
one.
Correct.
And then I guess the second question was, in terms of topics, right? Like, are the topics, generally, like if you think of our all the workshops that we do as networking, we have a certain amount of vetting through the networking group, certainly through the leads, but in others as well, saying like, hey, these are topics that we're interested in. They propose topics, right? I'm trying to figure out how alignment is done, right? Let's suppose, per the earlier call or earlier content of the call, let's suppose that we decided oscillation testing should be done through this TAP proposal and framework that was just covered, right? But somebody says, you know what, I don't want to do that, but I want to hold a webinar on an alternate way. So just trying to get a sense of how are the webinars, how do we ensure they're aligned, at least at a high level, with kind of the direction that we're going.
Remember, the webinars are not prescriptive like that in any way, and they're meant to be educational. So we certainly want to make sure that if there was a webinar, it might talk a bit about one of the methods that is promoted within the OCP, but we shouldn't restrict it in a sense that we want to give a broad view of the different alternatives, even if some are outside of the OCP. So it would be making sure that at least the positions of some of the perspective of the OCP is represented would be the way we'd look for alignment here.
I see. Okay. Just wanted to get a
Now,
sense.
so to give you an example, if someone in the content of the webinar would want to say disaggregate systems are not a good option in any way, shape, or form, would have to say, I don't think that's the right webinar for the OCP.
Right, in terms of so at a high level, you're ensuring alignment to OCP tenets, openness, scale, generally like that. But then also kind of at a lower level, how do we get it aligned? Okay.
Well, we'd want to make sure that no one's openly dissing perhaps what the OCP is putting forward. But in a way, you have to be a bit careful because competitors end up on a webinar and they will provide alternative views, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, that's what makes, in some cases, a webinar or interesting, is that different point of views are presented, as long as they're all presented fairly and openly. Right?
And there's the challenge, right? Again, because you were just on the previous conversation, right? In terms of our webinars covering things, if we've made something normative, or if we've a requirement, or generally strongly recommend it, then how is it getting positioned and all? I'm not saying that OCP. I'm not saying that OCP the only things we talk about must be a very tightly controlled set of stuff that we endorse. But just realizing that a webinar could have, I think we hope have very good view and visibility, and then just being aware of what message that's sending. So that's all.
Right, and so obviously the buck stops with me. That's why, and I have a 10-year history of doing educational webinars. But certainly, if I had any doubts, I would come to the area leaders, like yourself and the team, to make sure.
Okay, great. So let me pause. I'll pause with my questions. Any other comments on this webinar or questions for Cliff on the webinar series or topics for webinars?
Hey Cliff, this is Alex. I'm trying to understand, like from this webinar's perspective, would it be more focused on the things that are like established and more mature within the OCP group to get a wider distribution to bigger community, or would it be possible to use webinars for the new stuff that is not like being solidified within the OCP? To solicit more broader feedback and see if it makes sense to discuss deeper in the OCP. Which one would
So
it be better?
actually, it could be both. It really depends. Certainly, the second option you're asking about to do, if we have sufficient material along with an analyst, to do a webinar that's a bit more speculative on things we might not be working on, but problems we're thinking about. That could make sense. And webinars that talk about the future, bring an audience and help establish a community is definitely one way they can work. And then as long as something that's well established, if there's still an educational component required, which will draw people to a webinar, we could do that as well. So it's not really an either or.
Mhm. All right, thank you. Yeah, I have some, I'm thinking if you can take some of the topics that we are trying to develop and, as part of OCP and maybe get a wider reach through the webinars to get that feedback and see, how we can, keep developing.
That would be great. Is there maybe one or two topics we could talk about on maybe a subsequent call or on a
Mhm.
separate call that we could see about developing a topic and uh, put a small abstract together around what we thought we might want to talk about on the webinar?
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, we are putting together like what we want to discuss in the next monthly, in, and yeah, we could present that if that would be accepted, and then see if that fits the webinar
Okay,
approach.
so you're suggesting we take some time in the next monthly and I'll come to that meeting and
Mhm.
we'll put some of the ideas on on the table in terms of topic areas. And then if you like, I could go away and take those ideas and try to craft up a couple of webinar abstracts based upon those ideas and come back to the team and say, here's what I think the market might be interesting to the market based on my experience.
Yeah, pretty much, yes. Mhm.
Okay, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So two comments here. The first one is the webinar space is pretty crowded already, and it's going to be a challenge to distinguish these webinars to help them attract attention. My second comment is that the kind of thing I would like as a networking guy, I am vaguely aware that the telephone side of the house is very concerned with high accuracy timing, but I'm only vaguely aware of why. And I would love to hear a clean presentation of why timing is important, not how to do it, but why it's important.
Okay, well, let me address your first. So I think that could be what you're talking about time synchronization and networking and its value and where it gets used and educating the market on that. It could be an interesting topic. I think that because not a lot of people think about it, I think. Um, and in terms of the second one, I'm just going to refer back to the fact that I've have a 10-year history of selling these webinars as an analyst, and it really matters if you have a topic that people want to hear about, and if you've got a good analyst, a lead analyst that can. And by the way, I have relationships now I built with 5 different analyst firms, and we can go out and build others. If we bring a top analyst that people want to hear, and you have sponsors from fairly well-known companies, it typically does fill the audience in my experience. And so it's something I would say that I know how to do from my past lives, and It's the know-how that I'm bringing to the OCP. And also, Jim, I'll tell you that when I approached the different analyst firms that I did about being open to lead OCP webinars on an OCP platform under the OCP brand, I didn't get any pushback. All of them said that they felt that the OCP brand was very strong and they would love to work with us. And I approaching only people that have been in the industry for 20, 30 years, well-known analysts with strong brands.
Okay, thanks.
But that's helpful, I hope.
Yeah.
Cliff, this is really great. And so if you've got as we're close to wrapping up here, if you've got something that we can forward to the list, and appreciate you taking time to come cover the webinar opportunities.
Okay, Omar, I do have a presentation. How would I never sent it to the list before. Is it something I just do to the mailing list? Just send an email to the mailing list, or do you have to do it?
No, we will have to kind of make it available, like sending it as attachment. Let's see if that will work. Probably, I don't think so. So,
okay, I can. You're
Yeah,
asking me to put it up as a Google Doc and then send a link.
yeah, I think send that to me and Rupa, and we can test to see how that looks, and then we can send along.
Okay.
Or you can just post to the networking list too. That's fine.
yeah. Or, like you can reply to the agenda meeting, right? And
Yeah,
agenda email and yeah, attach it to it. That might work too.
yeah.
Okay, I'll take care of it. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks
Cliff.
much, Cliff. All right, thank you all. Happy New Year again. We're at the top of the hour, so thanks for joining, and
Thank you.
we'll
Happy New
see you
Year.
next time.
Thanks.
Happy New Year.
Bye.
Happy New Year.
New Year. Bye.